it, we have some incredibly powerful, girthy graphs and data that exude strong leftist energy. So, first of all, new registrations in 2025, this is literally like, this is the kind of graph that makes like freak crypto bros, you know, in their pants. And we're getting it for voter registration. Finally, the right line is going up, for the love of God. But it's a lot more than just new registration. First of all, this was right up to the deadline. Like literally, it looks like in the last 10 days or something, they got the vast majority of their new registrations. So the walk across Manhattan, all of the videos that he put online, all of that work that he did to get the name recognition, the cross endorsement from Lander, all of his interviews where freaking interlocutors were constantly grilling him about a foreign country and whether he'd visit and whether he'd have a succulent shrimp dinner with Netanyahu instead of arresting him. All of these things were in play during this crucial time where new registrations were happening. And we're going to see who those new registrations were. This is the 2021 primary. And you can see that this distribution here, by the way, very much if you know game, if you know ball, and you follow politics in general, like, you know that thank you for the likes, by the way. Thank you. If you're watching this on TikTok, please subscribe, like the stream, comment. All of that stuff helps massively. It's really like it's anyone's game as long as people are chatting in there, and I'm gonna do my best to respond to you guys and to Twitch. But this distribution here, where the younger you are, the less there are, okay? And then the middle, the dominant bulk of people is this group of kind of middle-aged but elderly, you know what I mean? Like people who are about to retire or just retired is where all the votes are. And then there is a significant turnout from the very elderly that is like pretty surprising given kind of the lifestyle of the very elderly, but yeah, that's how it is. Basically, the most politically engaged people tend to be the older people in society. But this chart here for the 2025 Democratic primary is like, I've never seen anything like it, not even remotely. It's incredible. 120,000 it looks like. I mean, you know, the scale is whatever here, but you can see that there's about over 100,000 votes is only for two groups, and it's 18 to 24 and 25 to 29. Those two are the biggest groups. That's never happening. That doesn't happen. If someone told you that was going to happen, if they're a pollster, if they're a pundit, they would have told you that you're full of shit. It's incredible. And we got to ask ourselves, like, this scenario we've been talking about for years, you know, back to like the Bernie days, that if you can get some kind of result like this and scale it so that elections generally follow this pattern, if you can flip it on its head so that the youth vote is bigger than the elder vote, I mean, that's like an aspiration that most people didn't even dare to have, okay? But nevertheless, it's happened in this election, and it really doesn't matter. You know, so some people are gonna say, oh, it's just a primary in New York, whatever. But the fact is, this result until now was considered utterly unattainable, wholly out of the, like, this is like you are flying too close to the sun. You're going, the wax wings will melt, and you will, you know, fall to the sea and die if you try to make this result happen. And yet, Zohran Mamdani pulled it off. Absolute legend. It's crazy stuff out here. I'm really happy about it, obviously. Anyone who's a progressive or a leftist should be happy about this, because despite the narrative that we've seen out there, young people are not the weird conservatives that they've been made out to be. And the reason that they've been made out to be that way is, first of all the disgusting garbage, manosphere, Joe Rogan bullshit content that they consume. There's also the fact that, you know, respectfully, young people are a bunch of like generally sex negative, antisocial, terrified of, you know, alcohol and partying people. And I think that just weirds out the general population. It's a different lifestyle. It's a different way of being. I don't know. I think, honestly, because these people went through school during COVID and because their parents went insane at a specific time, you know, I can hardly blame them for being a bunch of fucking weirdos. But that plus their uncharacteristically conservative voting patterns during the presidential election are the reason that people have this negative perception of young voters. But at the end of the day, that was during a time where it still held true that the youth vote doesn't really turn out. When it's possible to turn the youth vote out more than the elder vote, more than like the 50s and 40s and 60s, like, that's incredible, and that is going to inevitably be much further left than the alternatives. And here's why. Those voters may be uncharacteristically conservative in the 2024 election for president, but one pattern stayed true, which is that generally younger people are less conservative than older people. Millennials got way more conservative during the 2024 election, too. And I think a lot of it boils down to the fact that, like, people didn't want to vote for Kamala because they didn't think she stood for anything, mostly because she went out of her way to demonstrate that she didn't believe in anything in particular and didn't want to break with Biden in any way. I guess, you know, and if you look at the communication between those two, it really looks like Biden basically was forcing her at gunpoint to not break from him in any way. That's where, like, the no daylight kid thing came from. So, like, with Harris as a candidate, obviously, you're going to get a pretty sour electorate in general because you're going to get the freak Trump voters. You're going to get vote blue no matter who people, and then you're going to get not very many disaffected people, not very many independents coming out. And in fact, despite the tireless efforts of hacks like David Shore, people who manipulate and interpret data in a way that always gets the result that Democrats need to throw trans people under the bus, throw immigrants under the bus, support Israel, and, you know, basically the David Shore, Matt Iglesias playbook is that the thing that people like about Republicans is they're evil, and the Democrats would be well served by being sort of evil, but not as evil as Republicans. And we know how stupid that is. You know what I mean? If you're not a freak consultant who's never, like, worked a real job in their life, who's never lived in the real world, then you know that if the electorate has a choice between evil and evil light, they'll actually pick pure evil. They want the unadulterated, good, condensed, distilled evil. Because if you're going to go for it, you're going to go for the real thing. And honestly, it sucks, but, like, it's a reality. And I think that I saw commenters on some of my TikTok videos, like one in particular, arguing a lot about this. Basically, they were going back and forth about whether, when it was Trump versus Harris, people had an obligation to go to the polls to vote. And I would say, on an individual, personal level, that is unequivocally true. If you didn't vote and your choices were between Harris and Trump, I think on a basic level, you ought to have voted, and you ought to have voted for Harris. However, that question kind of doesn't matter when you're running a campaign. Because when you're running a campaign, your job is not to cast moral judgment on each voter. It's to look at the behavior of voters, look at the root cause of the behaviors, and see if you can change the behaviors or emphasize behaviors that are in your favor. So, like, that's pretty vague, but let me break it down. If you see that people are thinking about not showing up to the polls for Harris, like, let's say you're the Harris campaign, and you see that people are talking about not showing up because, like, they don't think that you're good enough, and they think maybe you won't even be as bad as Donald Trump on, say, oh, I don't know, I'm going to pick a random issue, none in particular, like the genocide that Israel is relentlessly carrying out against the Palestinian people. If you see that, there's two things going on. The first is that if you talked with every single one of those voters, if I did, I would tell them, you're stupid. You need to vote for Harris if you want to make a moral choice, because you have two options, and one of them is just, like, at worst going to be as bad as Biden, and there'll be a lot of other things that are much better. So, like, on a basic level, like the outcome of one option outweighs the other, okay? On the other hand, if you go up to these people and do that as a campaign, they'll just fucking hate you. And in fact, that is exactly what happened. That's how you get like people in Dearborn, Michigan, Muslim voters who are like, well, I know that the candidate I vote for is going to like instigate ethnic cleansing and kiss Netanyahu's ass, etc. But I'm going to vote for something different. Your job as a campaign is not to cast moral judgment on all of these people and say, oh, they fucking suck. You know what I mean? You're bad people, because you don't get someone's vote by just saying they're a bad person. What you do is you speak to the issues they're talking about directly. You explain how you're taking a stand in particular in relation to those issues, and you follow through with policies, you follow through with vibes. You know, I think that the Harris campaign touched on a lot of this. I actually felt the thing where they were calling Republicans weird and stuff would have been great. And actually the positivity stuff, you know how the Harris campaign was kind of like crazy positive, right? Like that was kind of like the flavor they were going for. The Harris campaign was very like had a positive flavor, and I think that was good. But the problem was like there were things that the electorate was very dissatisfied with. Primarily Joe Biden and his senile ass making a fool of America and himself repeatedly by a series of gaffes that are basically attributable to his mental decline that is related to his aging. So like, you know, people were pissed about that, and Harris just wouldn't say anything negative about him. They had a absolute like crackdown within the campaign. They pushed anybody out who had new ideas, and they really just were like, we're going to run the exact campaign Biden was going to run, but Kamala will be the one doing it. This was a huge unforced error, and people were ready for something new. The day that I heard Biden dropped out was one of the most optimistic days of that entire cycle for me. I don't know if you guys felt the same way, but right? Like, wasn't that like kind of an optimistic period of time? That short honeymoon period? You know what I'm saying? Like, that was nice. That was really nice. And thank you for the follows, Setflower. I really appreciate that. There needs to be something that gives. There needs to be a new strategy, something that speaks to the issues that people are facing. In the case of Zohran Mamdani, this chart happened because he spoke to the cost of living crisis. He spoke to the fact that opening and running a business fucking sucks. And instead of that, what was that weird thing Kamala Harris did? It was like, if you're a person of color making a business in a low income neighborhood and you operate for 5 years, then you get so stupid. Oh my God. No one will understand that. Zohran is out here like, I'm going to freeze the rent for 2 million people. I'm going to build a shitload of housing. I'm going to make halal $2 cheaper. It went from 8 to 10. We're going to send it back to 8. This is the shit that just, you can debate the policy all you want, but the fact is, when you're just taking the issues that people care about and punching them in the face directly, like everything you'll notice of these policies is directly speaking to the cost of living crisis and the things that people need. So obviously, in retrospect, it's obvious that was much more inspiring than Cuomo's strategy, which was to constantly defend himself against the sex pest allegations and to hopelessly kind of do a bunker strategy. I think Cuomo was just relying on name recognition, essentially. And Mamdani got more of it. His videos were great. His communication was great. His energy was great. This man was everywhere. He was public. He was available. He answered questions directly, and he didn't compromise his beliefs. You know what I mean? Like, and he also directly spoke to stuff. There's actually something I wanted to note, because Zohran and Kamala actually had the same issue. Do any of you, if any of you want to guess what it is, you know, before I go into it, they had the same issue, which is that they have been in politics for a while, both of them. They've had positions in the past that they didn't have. Thank you for the new follows. Hell yeah, I've got a lot of activity this stream. I appreciate it. I appreciate all of you. These likes make a huge difference. These follows make a huge difference. A lot more people are seeing the stream than usual, and that's thanks to you. Thank you. Back in the day, and by that I mean the primary before she became vice president, Kamala Harris had a lot of positions like relating to defunding the police, relating to transgender rights, and Zohran Mamdani also had a similar thing where he used to say defund the police a lot. And they both had a slight, they both had a substantial messaging change, though I would say the policy change maybe wasn't so big for if in Zohran's case, but they had a messaging change. And Kamala Harris basically said, yeah, I don't think that stuff anymore. And people would say, why? And she'd be like, well, I don't. And they'd say, okay, well, what changed? And she'd say, well, my opinion changed. And you'd never get anything, you know, beneath the surface. You never got like an idea of like what's going on here and why the change. Meanwhile, Zohran Mamdani, they'd be like, oh, you want to defund the police. And he'd say, no, I don't. I used to. Now I don't. What I want to do is I've listened to cops. Cops are overworked in a very specific way. And we need to take things that police do that they're not well suited to. We need to hand those off to civilians who are trained to specifically handle those things. And in fact, that idea is quite popular and always has been. And this is a little bit of a tangent, but when it comes to defund the police, that was always the policy. The policy was never take all the money away from the police in this slogan. And let's be real, I think it was a very stupid slogan. It was a very unintelligent slogan. And it was a slogan that came from a particular age of people who were my generation, millennials. And I'm going to describe the process. Millennials went to college. They went there, they learned shit about the world. They learned about institutional racism. They learned about the history of police as it relates to slavery and racism and all these horrible things. And they rightfully saw the problems and said, wow, these fucking problems need to be fixed now. We need to have less racist police. We need police who don't kill minorities all the time. We need a police institution that is fully removed from its history that is related to like slavery and all these horrible things, right? That's fair. And they noticed that, well, people talk about racism in one way in the vernacular. They talk about person-to-person racism, the part of your brain that sees a group of people, lumps them all together, and says, this group is bad. Then they started, and what they did basically was like, when you're in school, when they say racism, and when you're in college, when they say racism, they're almost always referring to institutional racism. And that's why, you know, in a conversation with a professor, when you talk about racism, unless you specify person to person, you're talking about the overarching structural thing where society favors one race, okay, over others and creates hierarchies that don't naturally exist. All right. But then those millennials went back from school, and instead of like talking to people in a way that is like human and relatable and normal, they did freak thing where they said, oh, well, anyone who isn't white cannot be racist. It is not possible. And I will not elaborate. And basically, you know, this was an extreme turnoff. You know what I mean? Like, basically, like, it's true because a black person cannot be institutionally racist. This is impossible, right? The institutions all favor white people. Or the white supremacy is baked into the institutions of this country, and in fact, of the world's institutions. However, the average person, but what would happen in these conversations is that people would basically say interpersonal racism doesn't exist, only institutional racism exists, and we're only going to call it racism. Anyone can be racist even against your own. That's what you see, you fell for it. I'm just describing the phenomenon, and you already fell headfirst into the stupid thinking, which is why this is such a stupid way to talk about it, because it's inherently kind of ambiguous and inherently leads people into this fallacy. You're saying, yeah, anyone can be racist, and like anyone of any race can decide to hate any group of people by race. That's true. That is true. You could be a black person who irrationally hates all white people and treats all white people like shit, and this is racism interpersonally. It is bad. You should not be prejudiced against people based on things they cannot change. This is bad. But that's really not the racism that the law deals with. That's institutional racism. So do you see how this conversation is so and how like there's a better way to put it? You know what I mean? You can frame it in terms of like you want to live in a fair society that favors nobody, a society that is equal. That's what you're aiming for. That's why that's ending institutional racism. But when you're talking about the difference between institutional and interpersonal racism, it is a massive distraction and it is a massive waste of time. back to defund the police, come full circle, that sounds like maybe unrelated, but when it comes to defund the police, there's a similar dynamic where people who are very educated at the time thought we need to basically reimagine policing in the United States. We need to take money. Well, we need to take the money from the police and put it somewhere else. So defund the police came out of that, and it was highly tied up with Black Lives Matter, which Black Lives Matter is the opposite. I think that's a wonderful message. That is, and everyone who fights against the concept, you know what I mean? Do you see how there's like naturally strong and naturally weak messaging? When you say Black Lives Matter, that is an incontrovertible fact, and even the who argue against you can't argue against that. So they always do this weaselly thing where they say, oh, white lives matter, all lives matter, and they sound like assholes. And that's why, like, after Black Lives Matter, all the protests, one of the biggest protest movements in this country's history, Biden won. There was a lot of overblown shit where the Republicans said everyone hates BLM, and it did not turn out to be true. Defund the police had the opposite result. People fucking hated defund the police. People were really angry because of BLM about police behavior. So we got some body cam reforms. We got some federal oversight of some departments. A lot of this stuff got clawed back, though. We actually got some reduction to police forces and increase in funding for social services in some places. But it didn't stick. It didn't stick because defund the police is a very toxic message, and it's very easy to get fearful, stupid suburbanites to coalesce around how bad it is, and they want to back the blue and all this shit. All right? So you wind up with a really situation where even though police brutality is obviously a problem, and even though police themselves are saying, I don't want to be a fucking therapist, I don't want to be a mental health interventionist, right? You're still not funding that stuff. You're still just spending more money on like the militarization of the police. So Zohran Mamdani is more than happy to move past the defund the police messaging. Just drop that entirely. It's vestigial at this point. He drops it and he says, I talked to the police and they don't want to do all this mental health. It's not something that they are interested in doing. So instead, we're going to get people whose job it is. We're going to get people who went to college for this shit, people who are generally underemployed anyway, and we're going to get them to do the thing that they want to do. And cops can go and do the things that people expect them to, like deal with homicides, like deal with armed robbery, deal with problems where the solution is the violence of the state. And at the end of the day, there will always be problems where the solution is the violence of the state, assuming we're not in like anarchist world, okay? Like, you know what I mean? Like we're not in the hypothetical, theoretical world of a stateless society. As long as we're constrained by the state existing, as long as we have countries and there will need to be. Zohran Mamdani was able to just sidestep this entire stupid, distracting conversation about whether defunding the police is good and actually get to the issue, which is that people want to feel safe, and the way they feel safe isn't with guys with guns, it's with mental health workers, it's with people who tackle the root causes of crime. There's a lot of studies that show that increasing police doesn't cause more crimes to get solved. Obviously, there will always be problems which can only be solved with violence of some kind by the state, right? Like an armed robbery, you can't always I find it hard to imagine certain crime interventions being possible with a social worker. And like, no one is saying that a social worker should do everything. But the police funding in almost every city in this country is actually like the highest line item. And I think that's where the whole defund thing came from. But like, I'm very happy to see finally a leftist do this, where they just kind of like drop one of those kind of phrases in favor of really getting into the meat of the policy and of helping people, which is the whole point of this. And I think that's why it cut through. It's really similar with Israel too, because liberals really try to get you into a jam on purpose so that they can support the genocide of the Palestinians, where they'll say, do you support Israel's right to exist? And for some reason, there are a lot of leftists and left-leaning people who basically want everyone who has asked this question to fall on the sword and just straight up say no, even though the average person in the vernacular would essentially interpret this in a horrible and incorrect way. So again, Zohran doesn't like take the bait. He just says, yeah, of course Israel can exist as a place with civil rights, bitch. And I think that that really works. Like, I think it's very obvious that that works. And I'm going to show you that even though that didn't work, liberals are still going after him for the crime of not supporting a genocidal maniac in Israel. Let's watch Hakeem Jeffries real quick, responding to a question about Zohran Mamdani. First of all, I also want to emphasize here that in any world where someone other than a DSA or leftist or socialist candidate won, if Cuomo had won, everyone in the Democratic establishment would have already endorsed him instantaneously with no debate. There wouldn't have been any conversation about the fact that Cuomo is a lawyer for Netanyahu during his war crimes trial. There wouldn't have been any conversations about Cuomo's sexual allegations. They would have just all fallen into line and endorsed. I'm going to show you what they do instead now that a socialist has won.
You mentioned the diversity of your district, including a lot of Jewish constituents. Mamdani has made comments that some have said veer towards anti-Semitism. His initial statement after October 7th, he criticized the Israeli government but didn't criticize Hamas. He defended the use of the word globalize, or the phrase globalize intifada. And he even said that the Israeli Prime Minister Netanyahu should be arrested, or he would, if he were mayor, he would arrest Netanyahu if he visited New York City. Do these things concern you?
Globalizing the intifada, by way of example, is not an acceptable phrase, and he's going to have to clarify his position on that as he moves forward. With respect to the Jewish communities that I represent, I think our nominee is going to have to convince folks that he is prepared to aggressively address the rise in anti-Semitism in the city of New York, which has been an unacceptable development. And any mayor, whether you're a Democratic mayor, a Republican mayor, an independent mayor, has got to commit to the safety and well-being of all of the people of the city of New York.
Absolutely.
And when there are moments of crisis and a rise in anti-Jewish hate, that's a threshold, of course, needs to be crossed.
Okay. So this is really similar to what Gillibrand did, who is another senator from New York, not Chuck Schumer, the other one. She basically said, well, I heard that he said something about globalize the intifada. I didn't watch it, but I hate him, and I think that he's an anti-Semite, and I think that he needs to back down right now, and he needs to change his mind. I will never endorse him, and he's a horrible person. But, you know, I have a few questions. And here Hakeem Jeffries is kind of doing his version of that. Basically saying, you know, he was asked like, oh, yeah. So first of all, the host, very disingenuous, said that Zohran Mamdani defended globalize the intifada. It's literally what he said. He said Zohran Mamdani defended globalize the intifada. What Zohran Mamdani said is that the word intifada means a lot of things to a lot of different people, which is just literally unambiguously, inarguably true. And what's more, he pointed out that the Arabic translation of the Warsaw Ghetto Uprising kind of exhibit or whatever in the Holocaust Museum used the word intifada, which, again, was true. Democrats really just need everybody in the Democratic Party to support Israel's genocide. They really want that. Even though 70% of the party thinks that it's absolutely disgusting, indefensible, etc., they don't care. They don't care at all. Foreign policy considerations are more important to them than winning or being, you know, liked by their base in any way. So they're circling the wagons around Mamdani, trying to find any way in because their boy lost. So now they're trying to make up for it. And Cuomo's still going to run. He's going to run as an independent, and he's starting from a bad place. So these guys are just juggling. Like, they're trying to seem like they're still loyal to the party, but they're kind of crafting these bullshit pretexts already to stop Zohran from winning, essentially, or from being a viable candidate. They're trying to find any excuse not to endorse him. And I want to find his response because it came out really recently. Let me see. Latest? I gotta find this one because he actually... Oh, yes. Okay, I got the clip. That's great. That's fantastic. Shortly after this, he went on Meet the Press, Zohran did, and he responded to this. So the setup is that there are two high-ranking people in the Democratic leadership, one of whom is the leader of the Democrats in the House, by the way, saying essentially that because he's a Muslim, he supports global jihad and wants to, you know, do anti-Semitic things. There's no evidence of this. The most prominent Jewish candidate in the race cross-endorsed with Mamdani. Lots of Jewish activists obviously support him. The youth supports him across the board, across denomination, across, you know, faith. And the only real anti-Semites in this conversation are people who conflate Zionism with anti-Semitism, people who say that Jewish people in New York have dual loyalty to Israel, and those are all just like your standard liberals. Those are the Chuck Schumers and Hakeem Jeffries out here.
To respond here and now, do you condemn that phrase, globalize the Intifada?
That's not language that I use. The language that I use and the language that I will continue to use to lead this city is
wow,
that
dirty-ass television.
Which speaks clearly to my intent, which is an intent grounded in a belief in universal human rights. And ultimately, that's what is the foundation of so much of my politics, the belief that freedom and justice and safety are things that, to have meaning, have to be applied to all people, and that includes Israelis and Palestinians alike.
But do you actually condemn it? I think that's the question. And,
oh my God.
Issue
how embarrassing.
That a number of people, both of the Jewish faith and beyond, have. Do you condemn that phase, globalize the Intifada, which a lot of people hear as a call to violence against Jews?
I've heard from many Jewish New Yorkers who have shared their concerns with me, especially in light of the horrific attack.
I feel like I have to pause here to point out that I have heard Jewish activists with Jewish Voices for Peace, or people who just work in a lot of different activist circles who are Jewish, have used this phrase. Like, to the extent that I agree or disagree with it is really irrelevant, because it is quite literally true that when people use this phrase, the place and the context is very different. What people mean is very different case to case.
Attacks that we saw in Washington, D.C. and in Boulder, Colorado, about this moment of anti-Semitism in our country and in our city. And I've heard those fears and I've had those conversations, and ultimately they are part and parcel of why in my campaign I've put forward a commitment to increase funding for anti-hate crime programming by 800%. I don't believe that the role of the mayor is to police speech in the manner especially of that of Donald Trump, who has put one New Yorker in jail who's just returned to his family, Mahmoud Khalil, for that very supposed crime of speech. Ultimately, what I think I need to show is the ability to not only talk about something, but to tackle it and to make clear that there's no room for anti-Semitism in this city. We have to root out that bigotry, and ultimately we do that through the actions, and that is the mayor I will be, one that protects Jewish New Yorkers and lives up to that commitment through the work that I do.
But quickly, for the people who care about the language and who feel really
relentless
concerned by that phrase, why not just condemn it?
My concern is to start to walk down the line of language and making clear what language I believe is permissible or impermissible takes me into a place similar to that of the president, who is looking to do those very kinds of things, putting people in jail for writing an op-ed, putting them in jail for protesting. Ultimately, it's not language that I use. It's language I understand there are concerns about. And what I will do is showcase my vision for the city through my words and my actions.
Let me ask you,
perfect. And I gotta say, he is so fucking good at this, and you shouldn't have to be this good at it in order to win. The only reason that this is an issue, and the only reason that this is so difficult, is that, like, there is a concerted effort. There is this crazy concerted effort to stop any progressive who is having any level of success from getting to the top. And the Democratic Party's whole thing, they know what they want to say no to. It's Bernie Sanders, it's AOC, it's Zohran Mamdani, it's anything remotely populist or progressive. They know they want to say no to that stuff. But you look at Hakeem Jeffries and Schumer and even Kamala Harris and Joe Biden, they don't believe in shit. The only thing Joe Biden believes in is Zionism, seemingly. You know what I mean? Like, they don't have strong values at all. They're willing to kind of change and they're overly flexible, I would say, and nakedly opportunistic. Zohran Mamdani here, immediately, if you can fight in the world of ideas and of values, you should. And if you can avoid fighting in the world of semantics and, like, wording, if it did grammar police, basically, you know what I mean? Like word police, you should. And that's what he does. Telling someone to condemn the phrase globalize the intifada because you've already failed with the whole, do you condemn Hamas? Do you condemn October 7th? Blah, blah, blah. He had a great answer to all that stuff. And we've gone layer by layer. Now we're at, do you condemn globalize the intifada? And guess what? If he said he does condemn globalize the intifada, you can bet your ass that he'd be on TV a month later being asked to condemn Free Palestine, that phrase, because there have been people saying Free Palestine and those people are not angels, and therefore that is a phrase that is very scary for the Zionist members of New York or whatever. That's where they're going with this. So since you can't keep retreating forever, what you do instead is you say, I'm not condemning it because I'm going to tackle hate crime where it lives. He's going to increase the hate crime program budget by 8x it. That's great. That sounds like that's just intuitively good. More money for anti-hate crime stuff during a time where there's increasing hate crimes. And if you're a leftist who says there isn't like any rising anti-Semitism, you are like mathematically, statistically, factually wrong, by the way. You shouldn't just pretend that stuff's not happening, because that's really lowbrow and it's just not true and it's not necessary. Okay, so like since October 7th, Islamophobia and anti-Semitism have in fact both been going up massively, and violent attacks against both groups have gone up quite a lot. The main cause, of course, is that Israel is committing a genocide, and that stokes tensions that were already existing and makes them worse and exacerbates them. But like, you can't just say it's not happening. And he didn't. He acknowledged it's going on. He said what policy he's going to support to do it. And he said why he's not condemning this. He said why he's not going along with their stupid game. And I think now the ball is back in the establishment's court. We're going to see what Hakeem Jeffries and Chuck Schumer and all these people say to it, because you can tell they're looking for any excuse not to endorse their candidate after they've spent a good chunk of their career saying vote blue no matter who. This time their boy didn't win, so they're trying to back out. But Zohran isn't letting them, because rhetorically, he has control of this situation. Because once you make it about equal rights and values and decency, you know what I mean? Like, he's very positive. He always has been. He's never said kind of this inflammatory stuff himself. Even if you don't think it's inflammatory, you know, he doesn't prefer to use it himself. So no matter what you think, you know, you can't say he said it, even though they've lied about it and said that he said it. But he's able to disprove it. That's great. And I think it's great that he compared them to Trump, too. That was like a really nice little turnaround, because it's like, no CNBC, no Hakeem Jeffries, no Senator Gillibrand. At the end of the day, you're doing what Trump's doing. Trump is trying to make certain types of speech illegal. He's trying to make saying Free Palestine illegal. He's trying to send people to foreign gulags because they are protesting for a free Palestine. And if you're going down that same road, you're just Trump light, and people are going to flee, or they're not going to show up to the polls. They're just going to be like, well, we can either have the pain now, or we can have the pain doled out slowly while the Democrats gaslight us and tell us it's not happening. The Democrats don't get enough hate. They need to be absolutely despised. They still act like people who are in a normal political situation, and the fact is the base is completely turned against them. That's why I think this is kind of, a lot of people are saying this Mamdani stuff is like the beginning of a Democratic Tea Party, and I hope that's true, because the Democrats desperately need reform. You have do-nothing losers like Schumer and Jeffries running everything. So, like, we can't get rid of the Schumers and Jeffries of the world if they think that they're safe and they think they can just ride this out. And it's very clear that they can tell that we hate Trump, which we do. That is super fair. I hate that guy so badly. So much. He's the worst. He sucks. And I also need him to lose to something good, because I saw what happens when he loses to something mediocre. It just delays the inevitable return of his fascist ass to the White House, okay? And I do think a lot of these Democrats are banking on him not being able to run for a third term and basically fizzling out. And that's not going to happen if the Democrats are so weak, so flat-footed. They don't talk about anything that matters to the working class. They don't talk about anything that matters to regular people. They have no meaningful answer to the cost of living, because all they've been doing is saying no to the left and to progressives for years, and not coming up with any ideas of their own. The best thing they can do so far has been this kind of consultant airport book, Abundance, and the people who believe in it. And Zohran, he must be a fan of my channel, because I was saying when that book came out that a progressive could easily subsume everything inside of it without giving any credit to the idiots who are trying to co-opt the party. And that's what Zohran did. He said, you know, he talked to, I think, one of the authors of the book, and he said, you know, I'm going to do, you know, I also believe that we should make it easier to build. One of his commercials that I found most compelling, the one about making lamb over rice $8 instead of 10, was straight out of the Abundance Playbook. Basically, there are not very many licenses for food trucks in New York City. And the city could make a lot more, but they don't. The city council's dragging its feet. The mayor could use his position, his or her position, to pressure the city council to issue more licenses. And lots of these guys running food trucks, what they do is they rent their license from someone else. Like the other guy agrees not to use his or her license, gives it to the new owner, and the new truck person, you know, whoever is running the truck, you know, that does the halal, the lamb over rice or whatever. That person rents it, kind of like how taxi tokens used to work. I know you guys are a mostly pretty young audience, but this is similar to how taxis used to work. One person has the license and they rent the license out to others for exorbitant fees because there's a limited supply. Zohran is proposing, let's just increase the supply of the licenses and make it easier to get a food cart license, because then instead of paying like $10,000 or whatever to rent it, you can pay like $400 to get your application approved. And once you have your application approved, you can charge less because there's thousands of dollars that you haven't spent, and you can use that to compete with your other food trucks. You can sell lamb over rice for $8. I found that to be quite a compelling ad, and I think it's incredible how you can just like speak directly to an issue that someone faces every day. Your lunch is too expensive. This is the kind of stuff I really think we should engage with. You know what I mean? I think that there's too much policy wonkery on the left, and I think the right gets this, where literally, like, I mean, Trump will just say, oh, I'm making eggs cheaper, and his idiot followers eat it back all up. I think you have to be slightly more persuasive on the left, because the realm of the left is the realm of thinking people, and the realm of the right is the realm of unthinking people. So they're very easy to trick, and very easy. They'll eat up anything. You saw it with the Iran bombing stuff, because all the Republicans were saying they're anti-bombing Iran. And the second that Trump did it, they said they're all pro-bombing Iran. That is not how it works on the left at all. If Hakeem Jeffries and Chuck Schumer believe something today, the base is not necessarily going to follow along. And as a matter of fact, both men are extremely underwater in their approval ratings, and they have no meaningful answer whatsoever. They're like, there's no other way to put it. They're utterly fucked. And they can tell, they see the writing on the wall, and that's why they are hesitant to endorse Mamdani, which is very ironic, because the solution to their problem has been handed to them on a silver platter. But because it goes against their priors, and because it goes against the consultants that are always in their ear, they can't accept it.